Do Americans, or some of them, have considerable problems blame shifting? I once heard the word blame shift when I watched a few videos about the topic or supposed topic of borderline personality disorder. In it, it was pointed out that certain individuals love to blame shift. Others might call it not taking responsibility. I would, though, from the outset, say several things. That responsibility is not just sometimes one factor. Sometimes there can be a number of factors causing a child's pain, for instance, and you can't simply say there was a, quote, clear-cut instance of abuse from one parent or one source, or even the term in my mind, abuse, implying that it was chosen. I had my mind blown open, for instance, a couple years ago by watching a movie, or rather video, somewhat entitled, "Don't Blame the Bully, Blame the System." And so, is blame shifting then really blame shifting if perhaps somebody's suffered from a multiplicity of causes? Just like in older age, our bodies break down and we have multiple system failures sometimes. How are you supposed to assign, quote, responsibility or force some one point source to take responsibility for its impact? Thus, you might say, in a sense, some say our society breaking down. How are you supposed to point out one particular source to someone's pains? Yet I would say at the same time, some parents have much more to contribute to the pain points of a child, say, than others, and can't simply palm it off, I would say, as, oh, the system is basically at fault. I'll give two examples from my life. Yesterday, and in the past year, an individual in my apartment complex, a mother of about 25 or 30, quite heavy set, short, longish brown hair, brunette hair. I've observed her yelling at her children savagely, so to speak. I use that word for emphasis, but yes, tearing into her children. Yesterday, for instance, a sweet enough boy, about 4 years old, was in a tree just on the edge of the parking lot of the apartment. And the mother, frustrated, I'm sure, by a number of factors, including severe economic problems, health issues, and more, but also trauma from her childhood impacting all that too, and no husband around anymore to raise the child or to help, she uttered a phrase that would disturb some people quite a bit. And she said it in a mean manner to hurt the child, not just out of frustration, I believe. She said, "Get out of that effing tree." Please excuse my French, or I would say the whole word. And I observed her like a year ago with similar comments, not with a swear word, so to speak, but very vicious. Also, half a year ago, in a parking lot in my town, a working class neighborhood of 30,000, I observed someone take their children to task in a similar manner. Children, again, about the age 4, 5, 6. And I refer to this as displacement of rage, and desiring to see people suffer in general also. Maybe that's exactly what displacement is in a sense. To just discharge that rage that can't be discharged upon the original source, often a parent or caregiver thus. But here's what kind of can tweak a few people, rankle a few people, amaze a few people, or just throw up your hands in the air. The woman told me a year ago she was so frustrated because her children were so difficult for her to raise. She took them to a psychiatrist or other such worker and had labels rendered. One child was termed to have Tourette's syndrome, for instance. Also opposition defiance disorder. Another had another malady. I think it was, quote, ADHD, termed to the child. But no one had told anyone, the mother, the child, that the child's basic problem is that the child had a mother disorder. In other words, the child was saddled, and with drugs too, with the notion their brain is broken for life also, that they're thus a stigmatized creature, second class or below. And the mother scot-free to carry on. Now, though, from personal observation and experience, to report such a person to Child Protective Services might be even worse. You see signs up all around needing foster parents, the need for foster parents. And I once knew a Vietnam veteran who had had over 50 foster children. He had turned it into a cottage industry. I would say, by the way, he was not a very kind man at all. Traumatized from the Vietnam War, he had been a mortuary man over there in Vietnam, very highly traumatized to the extent when he heard a noise, he thought it was a gunshot going off also. Not to mention the gory bodies he had to, process for funerals, whatever. And so the individual would sit with his back to the wall watching. He also had a one-click Amazon addiction, his wife told me, which she was helping pay the bills for by driving a school bus, a very sweet woman. A very rotund, heavy-set man with a grand manner, sadly about age 70, keeled over one day of a massive heart attack. He and a great friend of mine attended his funeral. At any rate, it must not have been much fun for the children to take the brunt of some of this. He had turned foster care into a money-making operation, and that's not the only person I've seen do this to pay the bills. He also had a monkey in the house wearing a diaper that would range throughout the house. I would say not to the amusement of some children, let alone what is not caught in the diaper or otherwise. So I would never think twice or think about reporting someone's activities with their children, as I've outlined, to Child Protective Services, lest the child end up in the hands of a chronic foster care parent for money-making reasons and having a monkey running around the house or the equivalent. Who knows? Let alone any arguments between the husband and wife, too. Granted, that's not all foster children, but it could be maybe a crapshoot. Who knows? Another closer to home example. There is a woman who I knew for many years. She confided to me one day, surprisingly, sadly, call it what you will, that she was living with her stepfather who was molesting her once a week. And she could not leave, she said, for financial reasons and more. The shame was intense, and she had a shame element of sometimes enjoying it too. Now, I was in her home and her stepfather's home occasionally. One day he confided to me, how can someone live with a stepdaughter or daughter or anyone so mentally ill as her? Amongst other things, too, she never smiled in the household oftentimes, and there was a complaint, why don't you smile or at least fake it? Her comment was, I'm not going to fake a smile if I don't enjoy it. She was very strapped for cash, income, an immigrant, and got off to the wrong start, got stigmas and more. The stepfather thus declaring her mentally ill, with a broken brain, diagnoses rendered, including bipolar. She was devastated and thought her brain is broken for life from a biochemical problem. And her stepfather has never seen a psychiatrist, therapist, read a self-help book, is massive, 6'6", probably 350 pounds, very aggressive, had a $40,000 Harley in the garage, and more, a plumber by trade. Kind of a sole profession in a sense. So he's declared sane. Well, he's declared basically perfect enough, but the daughter, mentally ill, with a broken brain, and she bought it, hook, line, and sinker, so to speak, in my opinion. And she could not escape for a long, long time. Then she got an apartment. She could not keep it up. Had a little fire there, garbage piling up. Next thing you know, she had an incident. She fell, fractured her face, and guess where she ended up? Back at home with the mother and stepfather. So naturally, life is not as simple as it seems, and I would put out the caveat here to repeat again a fascinating video along the title lines of "Don't blame the bully, blame the system." In other words, for every toxic parent, so to speak, as to the effects upon a child, they in turn had a toxic parent, and maybe a toxic environment, lack of good therapy, and much more. Many leaders turning a blind eye, what have you. Yet at the same time, some parents far more so than others in the same circumstances. And yes, there must be factors as to why that could be then. Probably from their environment and their education level and more. My other comment, though, it's so easy to find someone you can hire to issue anything you want, say anything you want them to say, deep six anyone you want. Several examples. A notable football player hired somebody to exonerate himself from murder charges, paying lots of money to that lawyer. Others in divorce court, very resentful, bitter, that they lost a divorce proceeding. They felt they were in the right over because the other party out-lawyered them with a better lawyer, so to speak, a more skilled lawyer. The country is legion as to examples of the number of people who have to turn to public defenders and end up in not so favorable circumstances compared to the other party on the other end, having much more deep pockets for much different proceedings, legally speaking. You can even hire a lawyer, no problem, or a medical doctor, or a combination, maybe even a judge somehow, to sign off that your parent is completely cuckoo and have them put away. I've seen this happen with a neighbor of my grandparents, for instance, or at least to the extent they were cleaned out by the children. Dominic Dunn, too. I think he was in a movie, Man in Full, or at any rate, in a show of about an hour and a half length, referred in somewhat derogatory fashion, I think, of certain lawyers as whores of the court. I hate the word and the phraseology and its implying choice, but still, the concept that certain lawyers would do anything, including, quote, sell their mother up the river for $5 or what have you, or mug an 80-year-old grandmother. So the phraseology goes anyway, to include a man 15 years ago when I was in therapy telling me, as a therapist, how can you tell a lawyer is lying? His lips are moving. Well, that's a generalization. Not all of anyone are the same. And even in a group that is quite egregious, there are outliers. But still, the concept being, you can hire somebody to do almost anything. Even in the movie The Bucket List with Jack Nicholson, one of his daughters, or a daughter, had problems with a husband, and Jack Nicholson said his answer was he hired somebody And that man in turn perhaps hired somebody and the problem was taken care of. Of course, then the daughter was bitter, as per the movie anyway. Others, maybe seeing their child in a cult, have even resorted to hiring somebody to kidnap the child, take them to the woods for a few weeks, and deprogram them. Of course, we all know too the concept of hired killers. There's at least one movie with Clint Eastwood where a pack of men come in as hired killers to take care of Clint Eastwood. I'm trying to remember the name of that movie. It was Pale Rider, yes. Hired killers brought in. So you can hire somebody to do anything and do it legally often. Has that happened before then, with regard to certain parents wanting to exonerate themselves from the results of the impact upon their children by hiring somebody to declare their children mentally ill, by way of a broken brain all the more, just in the same manner that certain entities in the U.S. government have declared the Native Americans to drink too much, shall we say, alcohol problems, alcoholism, for genetic problems. Even Hitler had declared whole swaths of people, of color, of homosexuality, of course, Judaism, of basically being genetically inferior. You could say biochemically imbalanced in a sense. Made that comment without sufficient proof, naturally. And look what happened. Of course, life is complex. But many parents these days in urban environments, two-parent families trying to make their rent or housing costs, anathema to wanting to move to the countryside usually, put children in daycare. I call it rent-a-parentism often. Maybe in a small town somewhat differently, but in many an instance, including what I've seen in after-school programs at a YMCA several years ago, children herded in, rushed, the person of 20 years of age dumping their problems on the children galore. I call that being a rent-a-parent, and how easy then to blame shift that or the results of urbania or inner-city schools, etc., upon the children. Of course, yes, not one person's fault. But I do know the example, wish I could pin my finger on it, of a man and woman raising children in a tiny little camper. And amazingly, at least one of the children became valedictorian of their class upon graduation from high school. Yet another man I had seen way back for psychological services, counseling, shall we say, PhD level, told me it takes $180,000 to raise a child to graduation level from high school, noting one of his children went on to become a lawyer. Whereas a Mexican farm worker, say, raising more than just one child per se, often, is probably not wearing gilded with gold diapers. And the Mexican migrant worker is not, say, spending $180,000 to see their child reach graduation. And you tell me who is probably more happy in life, more well-adjusted, so to speak, the lawyer or the son of the migrant worker or daughter. Money, of course, degrees, whatnot, clothing, cars, exempted from how we measure happiness. One last comment, and a very troubling one sometimes. How can you point a finger and say somebody is especially responsible if the consequences are what you might call almost catastrophic? Maybe not. If a parent is convicted of child abuse, what happens? I'm not sure. That's totally out of my ballpark. Do they get a slap on the wrist? Do they go to prison? Or do they simply lose their child? I kind of think they simply lose their child and have a little bit of a stigma that Child Protective Services swooped in and took the child. Did they go to prison for 20 years, 40 years, 50 years? I don't think so. For note, James Brady, who was once, I believe, press secretary for Reagan, President Reagan, incurred a gunshot wound to the head at one point in time when Reagan was also shot. And although James Brady lived many, many years more, died in his 70s, I believe, Wikipedia is saying, the death in his 70s was rendered a homicide by a court. Well, how many children dying before 70, maybe 60, 50, 40, are termed to have suffered homicide by death from whatever means? The playing field is not level here, is it? But how can you have any kind of accountability or discussion in general of cause and effect if the results often can be a draconian prison sentence, if that does happen? I'm not sure just what does happen when a parent is declared to have, quote, committed child abuse, or they lose a child to Child Protective Services. I don't know the exact results, but it might be a mere slap on the wrist, relatively speaking. But the impact upon the child, at any rate, in my mind, is that they go often to the end of their lives believing they have a broken brain, biologically speaking, something haywire in the brain as to its structure or chemistry, and they'll scratch their heads for the rest of their lives feeling second-class citizens, drugged, confused, in therapy their whole lives also sometimes. This, to me, is a very problematic thing in America today. And it started, I believe, with Thorazine in 1951, the first powerfully numbing drug, first called a major tranquilizer and later an antipsychotic, yet later its forms being simply a adjunct for even depression, or maybe just a happy pill. I'm not going to mention particular drugs' names of this accord. But as Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, had pointed out, when a new technology comes in that is very powerful and devastating sometimes, the effects, oh my goodness, can be used for good or bad depending on whose hands it falls in. Hence in World War II, chlorine, or was it World War I, very devastating. Then we had the nuclear warheads and Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, some arguing that wasn't perhaps the best manner of use of them ever. And now, then later, one psychologist, or rather psychoanalyst, Rollo May, saying he and a lot of other people at a point in time, maybe 20 years ago, maybe even now, were quivering in their boots lest there be a nuclear war. Perhaps yet another thing falling sometimes into the wrong hands, depending on who has the power to hire someone to utilize the tool, was and is Thorazine and its derivatives. In other words, anything that can numb anyone else, including a child, by way of it being called medicine for a broken brain, biochemically, structurally, what have you. To me, that's a very problematic question, and science can be quoted ad infinitum with studies galore, saying there is such and such a problem, but sometimes I think we just need to step back and take a bird's eye view. A bird's eye view from a person not declared to be a research scientist. In my point, my venue, a West Point graduate, combat arms in Germany for a spell, tanker, later 4 years studying part-time mathematics at a scholarship-only college. And with a background of being raised for his first 4 years, waking hours, by a grandmother from eastern Poland, World War II war refugee, from a small village of 2,000, farming village, and her husband, my grandfather, born in Odessa, Russia, or rather Ukraine, and a Mennonite. those are some of my credentials, and no college degree per se. I do not consider West Point a college. And so, who can say for sure how to prove anything except I have in my possession a book entitled How to Lie with Statistics. And so what can you say? There's been arguments back and forth, back and forth. One last comment. 10 years ago, my mother was in the town I live in, driving 5 miles an hour. She rear-ended another vehicle that was stopped at a stoplight. And upon her amazement, she was sued for damages for injuries. It went to court, and the judge threw it out, the whole case with prejudice. But what if the individuals who were very, very low income and hired a pro bono lawyer, by the way, what if they had had a lot of money and sued my mother? Well, she could have ended up in prison. Who knows? Although at her advanced age of about 70 then, that might not have happened. But if she were younger, she could have been cleaned out and more by somebody hired to basically deep six her, or as one woman downstairs in the apartment complex I live in said with glee to me one day after a very brutal marriage proceeding in divorce court years ago, said, I outpowered my husband, the alcoholic, because I got a better lawyer than he did, so I outlawyered him. She said that with glee, but much bitterness overall. My thoughts then, a very touchy subject to some, problematic in our culture, I would say, especially since 1951, with this tool, not chlorine gas, not nuclear weaponry, but drugs that can mind the numb, drugs that numb the mind, yet be called medicine, like a patent medicine 100 years ago, having cocaine or lithium, say, in them. Cocaine and Coke, lithium and 7-Up. And termed medicine, basically, until withdrawn from the market. Who knows what's next?